Thank you very much for joining us on 10 Across Conversations.
Thanks for having me, Duke.
So this is a different kind of conversation than we typically have, in that so many of the things that we cover are place-based, somewhere in the 10 Across geography, or absolutely centered on an issue that is also located in the geography. Could be having to do with energy or water or hurricanes, whatever it might be. But today we're talking about artificial intelligence, which is a ubiquitous topic if there ever was one. So we're going to apply that to 10 Across. But before we do it, give us a little bit about your background and how you arrived at this work.
Well, again, thanks, Duke, for inviting me to join you. And I've actually watched, not from too far, kind of all the work that's unfolded in the 10 Across world. And I've certainly enjoyed our partnership in exploring the intersections of place-based and digital urban development and design work. So I'm ASU's Chief Information Officer. That means I've got probably four jobs. One is to keep a utility going, a very large utility. So I look like any number of small to mid-sized towns along the 10 in that regards. Actually, we have multiple campuses, so it's actually a series of smaller cities stitched together. I'm also responsible for all the infrastructure that actually runs ASU, all the systems, all the technologies that support that work. I also have some responsibility on trying to figure out what ASU does next in terms of its digital presence, and again, the leveraging of digital technologies to advance the mission of access at scale with equity. And then, like almost everyone who works at ASU, its other duties assigned by President Michael Crow, and that can be a lot of things, including as part of my portfolio, I tried to be a good steward and orchestrator at this particular moment around our AI strategy.
And you and I have another connection. You spent a lot of time in Cleveland, as did I in Northeastern Ohio. And so we have an interest in cities, how they mature, how they go through their ups and downs, something you and I were talking about recently. And while you were in Cleveland, you were quite involved in making sure that people had access to broadband. Because if they have access to broadband, then they have access to everything that comes with it, which includes education and other things. Talk about why that was important to you in Cleveland and how you've brought that interest to Arizona.
In some ways, COVID helped the rest of the world catch up with the driver that actually broadband access was long ago no longer a nice to have. It was actually an essential part of being able to participate in the 21st century economy, in education, in health and wellness, and workforce development. Those were cases we were making in a Rust Belt town that had, in many ways, tried to figure out what it would do next. And my position was that growth with what was going to happen next was obviously a growth play, but it had to be growth with equity. It couldn't just be growth where part of the city was going to get gentrified and then the city core would be left to actually continue to devolve and create its own sort of social dislocation and all of the attendant challenges. So I spent a lot of time at a great university, at Case Western Reserve University, situated right in the heart of the city of Cleveland, and worked hard to frame how could a great research university with a great medical school, surrounded by fantastic cultural institutions and healthcare institutions, actually be the absolute best neighbor that any city could have. And our contribution from the technology side was actually to make sure that the amazing technology connectivity that we enjoyed at the university, really the best in the world, that we actually helped to design, engineer, build, support, maintain, was actually available to the community around us. And that became a part of the American, the one and only National Broadband Plan. The work that we were doing in Cleveland was an exemplar of the way in which research and development operations could partner with cities to actually be of service to the priorities of the community, as well as the work of the research, in this case, university environment. And then actually trying to build capacity to actually not only advocate for it, campaign for it, but to actually build it. To this day, takes on the work of connecting Clevelanders, inner city in particular Clevelanders, who don't have access to a home-based internet access. Again, fast forward, COVID made that evident to everyone in the country. Back then, and again, we started in the literally in the year 2002, so really 23 years ago, to make that case. It was a bit of a call in the wild, but we were not alone. There were lots of other, again, universities and organizations working on digital equity, now what we call digital inclusion. And that's the kind of work that in part actually attracted me to Arizona, to Phoenix, to ASU, because in our charter at ASU is a commitment not only to be accessible for education, not only doing research for public purpose, but also to actually be engaged directly, explicitly, to be actually of service to the communities in which we live and work. And of course, I made the case for making sure that broadband access, again, before COVID, was part of our charter. And we've been working on that consistently for the 8 years that I've been here. And I think we're making some progress. And all that broadband equity work is work that needs to go on. But, to be honest with you, the stuff that keeps me up at night is really what happens with the digital divide as AI becomes part of the sort of leading edge of access to tools for education and for creating social mobility and advancement. What do we do again to think about making sure that that is accessible and equitably distributed?
And this is where I think there is a connection between your previous work and the Tenacross project. In your case, in Cleveland, it was making sure that the inner city had what the suburbs might have greater access to, broadband, which then begets education and other things. In Tenacross, it's those rural areas that are finding themselves left out. And again, we have plenty of examples of that along the 10, but also in Arizona, where I know you've tried to bring broadband there. And you're right, AI is simply going to accelerate the potential divide unless we attend to it.
So since the invitation, I've been thinking, there is something that I think will be of interest to, your listeners and viewers, in that there's more to it than just the rural connectivity and rural access issues that are in play. In round numbers, I think, from Santa Monica to Jacksonville is about 2,500 miles.
Right.
And that is kind of the roads that we've all come to understand as the I-10 backbone. But I will share with you that obviously that incredible highway infrastructure, which was critically important for connecting, the southern tier, the ports, borders, right, transportation, commerce, all of which is part of kind of a 20th century reality. It also begat literally tens of thousands of fiber optics that run actually on the rights of way on I-10 and across the railways that actually are adjacent to the I-10. And those tens of thousands of fiber miles are actually already not just connecting the coasts, but they're actually connecting all kinds of points along the way, typically around urban areas in the form of data centers. And so there are literally hundreds of data centers that dot the I-10 along the way. And some of them are what we call hyperscale data centers. These are the data centers that run the massive cloud infrastructure. And they're everything. They're in Shreveport with Meta. They're here in Phoenix with Microsoft and with Google and with AWS. They're in Texas, all over. So data centers is is kind of a physical manifestation that essentially was made possible by the development in another era with the physical construction of the I-10. And in those data centers, I'll just finish the thought here, there are now hugely important fab facilities for semiconductors, where semiconductors are actually being either manufactured in these large data centers or actually being stacked and racked in these data centers to support basically the 21st century. And again, there are dozens of those, facilities. And in those fab labs, those semiconductors, that's actually where AI is actually being born right now. So along the 10, all of that is in play to support education, but also I would say to support economics, a completely new thinking of economics and the like. So what do you think of that?
So let's stick with where you're taking this conversation. We'll talk about some other topics as well, but you dove right into the analog aspect of this, meaning there are the physical presences of AI in these data centers and other things, which, as you well know, have both upsides in terms of what they can deliver and downsides in terms of what they need. And they need a lot of water and they need a lot of energy. How do those two things get married in your mind and or with your peers when speaking about the benefits of AI and what it takes to supply it?
And to be absolutely clear, I would not start by dismissing it out of hand. In other words, I see those two conversations as hugely important, and they are actually two truths that have to be held at once. I think trying to sort of seek a binary choice is actually conceptually the wrong thing to do, pragmatically the wrong thing to do, and from a technology guy's perspective, actually a sort of a self-defeating sort of tautological logic there that's impossible to disprove along the way. So both truths are in play. The capacity to build out an economy which is driven by AI is going to happen somewhere in the world. Trillions of dollars are going to be invested in this new economy, much as it was with steam, much of it was with oil, and obviously nuclear. Trillions of dollars are being invested in AI economy. And my position is, and I think it's the view of others, certainly around ASU, that that is once in a not only generation, but essentially once in a century kind of opportunity for us to position ourselves as the place, not on the coast where this work will probably unfold because of the legacy infrastructure that will support its development, but across essentially not only the Southwest, but I would say, why not across the entire I-10 to develop the economy of the future, ways of thinking about borders of human transportation, water transportation, electricity, and new kinds of transportation that will be driven by AI products and services that are in play. So that's one truth. And I would hold that is one really good reason for us not to be dismissive of how do you actually today and tomorrow think about how to power and cool that infrastructure so that we are in play there. And I do think, as again, Duke, you and I have chatted in the past, that it's not like tomorrow we have the answers to that. The demand for power and the demand for cooling and therefore water is greater today in terms of the graph than our immediate abilities to solve for it. And so, although I grew up very much in a moment in time when nuclear energy was not safe, and had all kinds of regulatory and real problems in terms of, I do think in the short term, and we're seeing it already, that is perhaps a short-term play that is relevant to this country and even to our geography that we're talking about today. And that over the next decade or two, that we will be focusing in on the ability to attend to the demand curve, which is going this way, by increasing the supply of available energy at the same time as we actually get much better at in terms of the efficiencies of the way in which we're able to support the compute and the storage of the AI infrastructure. So today it's good. Tomorrow it's got to get better. We have no choice but 10 to 15 years from now to make it hyper efficient that way. And we will put science to work and innovation to work. And we will invent that future because somewhere trillions of dollars are going to get spent on it. And I would think, although, I want this to be of global benefit, I want this selfishly to be of benefit to us in the United States and in particular to the geography that I live in.
Yeah. And in some ways, one could make the case, which we have, is that many of the cities and communities in the Tenacross geography were built on 20th century technology. So there's an optimism about what technology could do. You and I wouldn't be here in Phoenix right now were it not for people thinking that way. And we've seen both the pros to that technology and some of the byproducts that come with it. And that'll probably be the case again. In some way, again, I think this area is ripe for that kind of an investigation of what's possible, because that's the way we think here. And it relates to Ezra Klein's abundance book, which we could come back to maybe at the end of this discussion. But let's move to something that links the physical and AI, which is something you've shown an interest in, which is digital twins, which links place and having maybe a physical place along with its digital counterpart, in which we could maybe play out some of these experiments around water and energy and other things. Tell me why you have an interest in digital twins and their application.
Well, I think it's a great unlock. And if you don't mind, I'm happy to talk about Ezra Klein's book on abundance at the end, but I'm going to actually invoke it right now
Okay.
because one of the central theses here is that, in the post-war era, in the sort of that, many states have created a regulatory environment in which change is extremely slow to come by, cumbersome, expensive, and has led to a false dichotomy between those who those who have made it and those who seek to make it in the American dream. And I think that's sort of one of the central theses of the book. My view is that digital twins is one way to unlock value in be able to do all kinds of planning, all kinds of scenario building, all kinds of if what would happen then, if then kinds of scenario, in which actually we can, and when you layer AI onto it, then all kinds of multiple iterations that can be done without the actual cost of making it hyper bureaucratic, incredibly expensive, because time delay leads to all kinds of overruns, because environmental work that needs to be done it takes, again, time, money. There are ways in using digital twins, which, again, just for your listeners and and viewers, is the idea of effectively building a simulation, a real-time simulation, not a static simulation, which allows one, the planner or the designer or the developer or the community at large, to situate, again, with time being something that you can move. That is to say, you could start from time one and go, what if all these variables loaded, and what happens if you change the variables along the way, to see the impacts that could actually come into play. And so what we do know from the first set of global best practices in the digital twin world is it helps in co-designing the future, because almost everybody who's interested or curious even can find their way into the conversation. And whether you're a specialist in actually using the tools, you can actually at least use what's called natural language processing. You can actually use your own voice to actually be a participant in the co-designing of the work. And then it allows for effectively low cost, almost no cost, to make changes in the activity. And it allows you to not only do it, again, with text, it allows you to do it with complete three-dimensional, can be completely immersive. You can create flyby experiences, not only for buildings, but for parks, and or for what happens when the sun is impacted by shadows from buildings, and or what happens to water flows across creeks and the like. And all of that, I think, is a great unlock of value at a moment in time when our legacy cities are still grappling with how do you support the social tension between those who have entitled a sense of having made it, and so much of, especially here in the Southwest and along the I-10, pretty much corner to corner, where people want to actually make it. People want to move into our geography to establish and try to realize their dreams. This might be an opportunity to unlock opportunities to have both an abundance mindset, but to also actually unlock an abundance economy.
And there are two ways that one might think about this digital twin. Let's assume we had one of the I-10 region.
You should do that, Duke. You should do that.
We should do that, Lev. All right. So that's
all right. Well, let's go find some friends and do that, because that's a real project.
It is a real project. And while you said, hey, it's almost no cost to run various scenarios, there is some significant cost and time and energy to put into the model.
And expertise. You're absolutely right.
And we should do that properly. And two areas where that could be particularly useful, because one of the reasons we've chosen this geography is, one, it's on the leading edge of climate change. So we do need to see what's going to happen. We need scenario planning for what's surely going to befall us, which is greater heat, more frequent storms, et cetera, which in turn links you to insurance, which is also being impacted by AI, because now the ability to synthesize vast amounts of information and suggest what insurance policies should look like in the future, which could come with some upsides and some downsides. If I can really calculate your risk, you're probably going to have to pay for it. If I can really calculate your risk, maybe you won't live in a place that is so risky, if you will. So there's a lot going to happen with regard to the digital twin and or the physical environment and things like our understanding of weather, climate change, and how that impacts things like insurance. Fair enough?
Totally fair. And again, these are fabulous opportunities to create more of a precision science where, again, I think, all along the 10, the great universities and schools and ultimately K to 12, this is an opportunity for us to actually have our students participate in designing their own future and working to create, in fact, industries that don't yet exist. And yes, helping the insurance folks in the world, not only with actuarial science, but what happens if we actually make changes, not simply assume a linear path with respect to costs or impact of climate change, but actually make interventions to actually change at least the trajectory or the slope of the line along the way and actually show impact along the way. But almost all of that work historically has been retrospective. Basically actuarial science takes a pass at what has happened and then projects out. What we can do is anticipate, whether it's climate, whether it's economy, schooling outcomes, the impact of science, the impact of AI, is that we can run all kinds of simultaneous simulations, and again, choose if we choose to, policymakers, developers, investors, a path which provides for sustainability with growth rather than sustainability or growth.
Which that last remark you just made is the essence of 10 Across. If you have access to this information, we would suggest you have an obligation to act on it. But for various people in politics or policy making or some private sector, that becomes challenging. But let's talk about how to use the information a little bit later. I want to go back to your key reason for being here at Arizona State University, not only bringing AI into the community, but pushing it towards the benefit of education and our students. I think there's two sides to this. There's a very obvious upside, which I want you to speak to, because I think you're an incredible advocate for how we can improve education. And certainly this university is committed to distributing education, especially to those who might not have access to it. AI and other digital means make that possible. But even if you're on campus, how to use it. So talk about the benefits of AI as you see it in the realm of education.
Well, I certainly, for those of your viewers and listeners who understand the charter of ASU, this fundamental commitment to access at scale, again, is in and of itself an impact statement. But the moral purpose of the institution is, informed by the commitment to an equitable future for all. All who are interested in learning should have an opportunity. And no one should be discounted or disqualified on the basis of their zip code, their circumstances in life, if we do our job right. And I think that that's always been at the heart. Well before we understood the power of AI, always been at the heart of the mission of ASU, and we have distinguished ourselves by partnering with industry to create all kinds of innovative and creative solutions to advance that, again, access at social scale in an effort to support impact for our community at large. And AI is, in fact, as we've all discovered in this relatively short period of time, a great opportunity with some, again, risks that need to have guardrails that we have to be very thoughtful and intentional about, and ethical considerations. And there are all kinds of challenges that will, over time, hopefully get better with respect to the limits of the technology at the moment. But the overall effort here is to make it possible for everyone who's interested in the learning experience to be able to use the tools. So that's one part of it. It's the how do you use the tools to accomplish a something as simple as a homework assignment,
Mm-hmm.
to actually how to use the tool to create new opportunities for a new startup that's solving an environmental problem, or how to help your community with working on a social impact study, or how to, again, all the how-to questions that are out there that are hugely important, and not just do them with text-based inquiry, but really having conversations. There's, we in the tech world are famous for using language that no one understands, but we call it multimodal AI, which is to say not just text-based, but voice and video and images. All of that is now essentially in the toolbox of the how. And then I think the big questions, the really big questions that are out there that are huge for educators to think about, is that as we enter into the era of AI, not only do we need to solve for the how to use it, but what do we actually need to do as educators? What is important to be a educated, engaged citizen in this part of the world in the 21st century, one defined by AI being available, which is to say, information is no longer scarce. The ability to assemble information is no longer scarce. The ability to search information is no longer scarce. All of those were the premises for 250 years about why we needed one form or another, over time, more and more democratic access to education.
So it happens to be that the Tenacross region has the lowest literacy rate in the country. It almost follows the 10. And I know you've taken a great interest in things like writing on campus and how to use these tools with regard to that. And so it would seem that we have on our doorstep the tools that could be applied to what's an obvious problem. But you also mentioned things like good citizens. We're not just graduating students, we're graduating citizens. Let's call this the slightly darker side of this. And it's not all the obvious things about AI. It's more about the potential to cause people to lose connections with others. I'll be moderating a discussion tomorrow night on Robert Putnam's work, the author of Bowling Alone, and how his studies over the past several decades have shown that people are less engaged with each other, less engaged in community. And some of the tools that have been proposed using AI are, yes, the phone you carry in your pocket, and it will speak to you and help you do things. Do you think about the potential for tools like this, not just the physical artifact, but AI, to further distance ourselves from personal interaction, which exacerbates the problem that Putnam points out, which seems to be quite real in this country and maybe is reflected in our current governmental situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we at ASU have been studying this, as have others. There's an MIT study that actually just came out in the last 10 days or so, in which we're seeing in this earliest stage. Again, let's just be really clear: we are nowhere near the maturing, middle of the road use of AI for any purposes, including for education. But in these early days, what we are finding, because we as educators haven't actually shifted the nature of the way we measure inquiry, is that this a form of cognitive offloading. We actually are cognitively offloading, which is very important human quality, to the machine right now, because we actually basically said in the past, your ability to cognitively process a particularly interesting challenge and show evidence that you knew how to do that was evidence of you actually being, competent, wise, skilled.
Yes.
So it turns out the machine can do many of those things, and we keep on measuring, how good is the machine at doing those sort of, again, cognitive issues that were important yesterday. What remains to be seen is, what are the persistent cognitive skills that are going to be really important for us as humans going forward. And again, this is not binary, like today versus tomorrow, but along this journey to make sure that we are advancing opportunities for us as students and as citizens and learners to find our voice. Again, one of the things that we have found at ASU is that our most creative faculty, who are redesigning their pedagogy, who are redesigning the ways that they've established what needs to be learned, not just how to learn it, is that students are reporting in a very authentic way that after forever, like in the writing experience, we had all kinds of creative, innovative, new pedagogy that's being introduced into the first year writing world, which Lord knows, I mean, I remember it with immediate nightmares, immediately flashing back in my own experience along the way, because the how was for me so foreign. And I understood that was sort of a threshold issue for me. But what's going on now oftentimes is that students are reporting back that working with AI and the guidance of their writing instructor, it's a quote unquote, and this is like a quote, almost verbatim. Students are saying, I finally found my instrument in the orchestra pit. I finally found my voice. Because instead of working on just the technique of grammar, which is important to understanding it, I was able to work both my voice and the machine and correct it and ultimately iterate, and in the end found myself actually excited by the way in which I could express my ideas in a way that, again, as a 18, 19, 20-year-old, or maybe somebody coming to college for the first time as an adult, being overwhelmed by the how. And this is, again, potentially a great unlock. Doesn't mean that it's perfect. Doesn't mean that it works for every situation. Doesn't mean that we're going to have to traverse together, all of the challenges associated with academic integrity and all the issues with ethical use and the biases of our models themselves.
Yeah.
But there are ways for us to reframe it, and over time, and again, that's one of the absolute privileges of working at ASU. We have a community of teachers and scholars who are leaning into this. And if anyone is going to figure this out at scale, I think it's going to be a place like ASU.
Totally with you in terms of how this can work and your ambitions. I asked myself the question, as you said, hey, working with the machine, this is the students you were quoting, I found my voice. Fantastic. Does that mean they now have their voice and the machine can go to the side a little bit more? Or have they now learned to use the machine when they need it to keep getting better at what that is, improving that voice, becoming more articulate, and all those kinds of things? Because the dependency on this thing, and by the way, we are clearly dependent on our phones. There's just no doubt about it. What I want to add to that, it sort of relates to the digital twin. I want to see this interconnectedness between people, so that maybe we're all using some of these devices, but I eventually have a conversation with someone like yourself, or we're seeing people speaking together in groups, and we're building some intentional networks so they become as comfortable with the machine as they are with each other, which I think is what Putnam and others is describing as potentially being lost the more we are enabled by some of our tools, and how to supplement that activity, interestingly, with a lot of human interaction and human networks that really require you to spontaneously think on your feet, be your own person, bring all that goodness that you've derived from these machines and the tools.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would simply say that there are multiple truths that have to be held at once.
Yep.
Here. And I don't disagree whatsoever with you. We know from survey data, Gallup data, for example, that the Gen Zs who are entering into the workforce clearly understand that they do not know, they are not intuitive to know how to actually influence outcomes in the workplace, because they haven't had experience talking in this human to human way, which in an earlier set of generations was natural. And of course, in our circumstances that we're talking about are things that can be learned. At the same time, there's no changing this trajectory of actually humans working with machines. That's the challenge for all of us going forward. The workforce of the future for all of our communities will be the creative blending of humans working with a digital workforce along the way. And again, hopefully we can do both. I think if we're not intentional, we definitely won't do both.
Right.
If we're intentional, hopefully we can continue to have these kinds of conversations, which will inspire others to have conversations in their local context, and every kind of conversation that's necessary, from the kitchen, the table conversations, to the neighborhoods, to the community centers, the churches, where people congregate, hopefully still as important places. And of course, that would extend to the classroom and to the workplace.
So I see that we need to bring this conversation to an end, but I would say that your enthusiasm for your work, your optimism about what can be achieved, and your commitment to it is a further demonstration of my point. Human to human interaction and conversations like this one, where we're coming to agreement about certain things, we're maybe sliding past each other a little bit here and there because we see the world differently, as all humans do. But we come back again to say what is common between the two of us. And I just think you're one of the greatest spokespersons for the benefits of education and how to deliver it to the greatest numbers of people we possibly can. So, Lev, I want to thank you for your time today and your insights and willingness to push back on occasion on some questions, which I really sincerely do appreciate. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Duke, for the opportunity. Great to see you.